Imagine what can happen when a group of very caring and very technically savvy individuals get together to make others' lives better. Real magic happens. And you'll soon hear about this very real magic created by our featured organization.
Welcome to Small and Gutsy, a podcast featuring interviews with nonprofit and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. My hope is that you love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Feel free to pass along any valuable information you hear today to others, and remember to send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com.
e-NABLE is an online global community of digital humanitarian volunteers from all over the world who are using their 3D printers to make free and low-cost prosthetic upper limb devices for children and adults in need. The open source designs created by e-NABLE volunteers help those who were born missing their fingers and hands or who have lost them due to war, natural disaster, illness, or accidents. There are approximately 20,000 e-NABLE volunteers in over 100 countries who've delivered free hands and arms to an estimated 8,000 recipients through collaboration and open source design to help those in underserved communities who have little to no access to medical care. e-NABLE has given new meaning to the phrase, lending a helping hand. Begun over 6 years ago as a humanitarian movement, e-NABLE has evolved from a group of pioneers to a network of over 180 chapters and numerous volunteers globally. e-NABLE truly brings magic to those who need it. What an incredibly fulfilling movement. I am so very excited to introduce my guest today, co-founder of e-NABLE and co-founder of the Rochester chapter of e-NABLE and a director of Rochester e-NABLE Limited, which is a 501c3 that serves the entire e-NABLE network, John Schul. Welcome, John. What an incredible thing that you have started and created. And I'd love to hear about your passion just from the beginning and where it is now.
Well, thank you so much. Very nice introduction. I should say that the numbers that you cited are approximately true, and like everything else in e-NABLE, only approximately true. e-NABLE is a global movement, and it is one that is really trying to push the limit on minimal central organization to empower a global volunteer network of autonomous individuals and chapters. And as such, I would say we have indeed had 20,000 people involved in some way, but the number of active users changes from moment to moment and is almost certainly at any given moment less than the 20,000 you mentioned. On the other hand, by now we will have done at least 8,000 devices and reached some thousands of individuals.
Just amazing, John. How did it begin?
We have a cherished creation myth which has the virtue of being true. It all started in around 2013 when a carpenter in South Africa accidentally had an accident in his shop and chopped the fingers off of one hand. I didn't know him at the time, but some years later I had a conversation with him and he said, and he's actually a strange and interesting individual, and I believe him. He said, as soon as it happened, I started thinking about how can I fix this, because he was a carpenter. Prosthetics, especially partial hand prosthetics, if you're only missing part of your hand, are not easy to come by. They are extremely expensive. And by the way, they're not very popular either among the people who use them. And he started thinking about how he could do it better. And he found his way to, of all things, a prop and puppet maker, someone who's involved in cosplay and other sort of costumery in Washington space. That guy's name is Ivan Owen. And he had made a video on the internet, the carpenter had seen on YouTube, of a great big robotic hand costume he made as part of an event that he was involved in. The carpenter recognized that the wire-driven puppetry involved in making that great big hand work might be useful for a prosthetic. He sent an email to Ivan. Ivan turned to his wife, Jen, and said, I think I'm going to help this guy. And the carpenter and the maker collaborated from across the world for about a year. About halfway through, they had come up with a mechanical model, and they realized they could collaborate using 3D printers, and they actually got MakerBot to give a 3D printer to each of them. And so it was one of the early cases of consumer 3D printers being used for a trans-global collaboration. And eventually, there was a YouTube video telling the story I just told you.
Wow.
And it mentioned two things that caught my eye. One was that they'd come to realize that the device they came up with might be useful to the tens of thousands of children born each year missing fingers and hands. And the other was that they were putting their design online so that other people could build these kinds of things.
So the concept of open source and sharing.
At the time, I was a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. I was supposed to be preparing my own class, but instead I was watching YouTube videos, and I saw this one, and I managed to procrastinate about an hour away on a whim. And the whim was I created a Google Map mashup that allowed people to put colored pins on the map. And up above the map, I said, e-NABLE is a global pay-it-forward network built on an infrastructure of internet communications, 3D printing, and goodwill.
Wow.
And then there was a little line that said, if you have a printer and you want to help, put a blue pin on the map. If you need a hand or know someone who needs a hand, put a green pin on the map. I put a link to that map in a comment on the YouTube video. And as that video continued to go viral, people saw the comment and pins started appearing on that map. When I got home that night, there were 8 pins on the map. Within 6 weeks, there were 70 pins on the map. And at this point, people start calling me and saying, hey, now what do we do? As if I knew.
You've created an organization.
So I created a Google Plus community. Over the years, that grew to where it had 10,000 people had enrolled. And when Google Plus went away, as it did somewhat precipitously and to our horror, we managed to get on a lifeboat and we moved to another place. And we now have currently about, I think, 2,000 or so active collaborators on our new online home, which is hub.e-nable.org. And we are a going concern.
And you've only been operating for a bit over 6 years, right?
That's correct. That's correct. We have a solution and we have a way of reaching people who have not been served by what I call the conventional enterprises, not by government, not by NGOs, and not by business. There's no business model. And in some ways, that's why we have succeeded. We're not a conventional enterprise. We are able to do things and reach people who are otherwise not reached. And in some ways, I think that's the biggest potential of e-NABLE, is to act as a recognizable model of something that isn't a conventional enterprise that can fill societal gaps that established organizations haven't figured out how to address yet.
Part of it, it sounds like, is the model of having a chapter. So I want to hear a little bit more about that.
At first, it was a bunch of individuals. By the way, in around 2016, when we were up to, I don't remember, but I think 5-ish to 6,000 individuals, that was a lot of people, all interacting on a peer-to-peer basis in an online social network. It became very hard to manage, even though our goal wasn't managing, but even just keeping a group like that talking to each other in a constructive fashion turned out to be quite complicated and difficult. And to some extent, it can't be done. I mean, frankly, I think what we've seen with Facebook and social networks on the international scene shows that at every scale and at every level, there is a point at which online social media are likely to turn into circular firing squads in which even people with the very best intentions find it very difficult to work together collaboratively and constructively and pro-socially. We realized that some of our most effective groups and certainly some of our most manageable activities were ones that were not being managed because they were being done by local chapters that were cropping up. You know, local chapters, these are collections of individuals who know each other. They can look each other in the eye, they can hold each other accountable. And by the way, they have access to all of the, I used to be a biological psychologist, all of the primate neural circuits that keep people well behaved in human social engagements,
Mm-hmm.
most of which tools are inhibited or can't be engaged in online communities, which
Right.
is itself, I think, an interesting communitarian point about the world we're trying to live in today. And so we started encouraging chapters, and we started coming up with other techniques that might work to celebrate and encourage positive social behaviors and the right kinds of behaviors without exerting a top down management scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a program now in which we register chapters and put them on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's no longer it's no longer volunteers and recipients on the map, it's chapters on the map. And we have another program in which we award badges for various laudable activities.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about badges is no one needs a badge.
Right.
It doesn't get you into the movies, but it does say these are things we think are really laudable achievements and contributions by e-NABLE volunteers. If you've done one of these things, we encourage you to give us a little bit of information and claim your badge. And in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, I talk about the problem of managing. In software, there's an expression that says it's like herding cats, which is
Mm-hmm.
not easy to do. I
Mm-hmm.
like to point out that if you have a house full of cats
Mm-hmm.
and you put food in one room and you have the door open and you make some kind of a disturbing noise in another room, all the cats are going to end up where you want them to add up.
So these chapters that are popping up is because folks have learned about what you're doing and have a 3D printer. So they already may have some technology or understanding, I would imagine. And then how do folks in need find them? How do they get access then to the actual device that they can use?
I'm tempted to say that's what I want to know. Um,
Good for you.
right now, it is in fact the case that we have more volunteers than we have recipients. We have more supply than we have demand for exactly this reason, I think.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's a going concern, and in different parts of the world, that balance shifts one way or the other. In the early days, 2015 to 2017, 2014 to 16, perhaps, we were one of the go to media stories. There were clips in most small towns, most cities and towns in America and many around the world with, headlines like local volunteer makes 3D printed hand for local child. Very telegenic. And indeed, I have to say we were quite lucky because the e-NABLE story and the e-NABLE values and the e-NABLE methodology are all well captured by a headline like that and a video clip of a cute kid with a superhero hand and a smiling parent and a proud volunteer. And you don't need much in the way of value statements, mission statements, or anything else for people to say that's really cool. My cousin could use one of those hands.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to get a 3D printer in order to do this. And of course, when they happen, it means there are more cases around the world, and then there are more news reports.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been sort of our mechanism of growth, has been fairly organic and fairly media based.
Which makes sense because it does make an incredible story,
That's right.
and I think that it sells itself, so to speak.
Not everyone is plugged into the media. The people who need these things the most are quite possibly unaware that these solutions are available. That's truer in places other than America, where I am and you are. At this point, I really don't know if it is true in the United States, but I do know that it's true in many parts of the world, and it's not evenly distributed across socioeconomic class, of course. And in some ways, that's what the chapters do. Some of the chapters spring up because they recognize that there's a need. There's a spectacular effort underway in Syria, for example, where you've got a volunteer who's doing extraordinary work under extraordinarily difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
That chapter is there because there's a great big need. And so he's in touch with the people who need these devices and he's taking care of it.
Mm-hmm.
So chapters spring up where chapters are needed,
Mm-hmm.
and some chapters have developed their own outreach programs.
You've probably toyed with this idea, but I wonder if even in the US, you can partner with even medical facilities in certain areas that might get the initial inquiry And then because a person doesn't have insurance or doesn't have the economic resources, that you could then have those partnerships developed. I'm not sure in certain other countries that might be similar, or there may be a social service agency that's providing a service in a village, as an example, and may be able to do that outreach, with you, for you. I don't know if that's been a discussion point for you.
Oh, absolutely. And, there's an expression in the world of science fiction and technology that says the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And all of those things that you're talking about are underway. They are not evenly distributed. Let me give you some examples. One of the big issues has to do with the government infrastructure and the medical care and insurance story. In the United States, adults who lose limbs, their insurance will cover prosthetics typically. But of course, they are medical grade prosthetics, and they're fairly expensive and they're fairly heavy and clunky. If you're a child, they're typically not covered, or if you have good insurance, you get one. But kids grow, right? So saying, here, we're giving this kid a pair of shoes. That's really nice for a few months, right?
Exactly.
Furthermore, not everyone has insurance. Furthermore, prosthetics are fairly well regulated in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration.
I did not realize that.
And yet, we're not medical professionals.
Right.
We are volunteers and proud amateurs producing non-medical grade devices, which are not even, formally speaking, medical grade prosthetics. There is a very well-established network of professional prosthetists who have studied for years to produce fairly expensive devices, which are sanctioned by the FDA and by doctors. When e-NABLE came along and the news started saying, look, these guys are giving away devices that they make themselves instead of ones that prosthetists sell for $20,000, it did not play well, for very good reasons, with the prosthetic community.
Right.
And it still doesn't play well with the professional prosthetic community.
And yet it's a completely different market.
It's a completely different market.
I'm sorry to barge in, but it's like, seriously? This is a completely different market.
That's right. Another secret of e-NABLE's success is that these hands, because they're 3D printed on consumer printers, and because we discovered that kids really like them, they're often plastic superhero hands that don't even try to look like regular hands.
The best. Who doesn't want to be a kid who suffered something, either from birth or otherwise, get to go to school and be the kid that is pointed out for a positive?
That's
you
right.
You have done such a miraculous thing.
We get told that mother says, the other day, I was skeptical about this 3D printed prosthetic because, and this is true, he said, Billy can do whatever he needs to do with the 1.5 hands that he has. He didn't even know there was an issue, but he said he wanted one. And I said, okay. The very next day we're in the park and Billy was sort of sizing up another kid he might play with, and he was sort of shy about it. And the reason he's often shy is because the very first question is, why is your hand so weird? And it's embarrassing and it's awkward. The first day he had it, he said, well, I have a superhero hand. They got over it and they started playing together. Right. He becomes the cool kid in the class. It was not part of a grand plan. It just emerged as one of our selling points, if you will.
It's just a wonderful natural byproduct. You were really interested, I imagine, in just fulfilling this need.
That's right.
And then it expanded into what it meant for people. And that is a byproduct of what it meant for a child and what it meant for the parent. For the first time, to have their child in some way on not even equal footing, but a foot above or a step ahead, however you want to frame it. And that is a gift to that child, the family.
To connect this story to your question about the varied patterns around the world.
Oh, yeah.
And the challenges in this particular situation.
Yeah.
Prosthetists look at these devices, these 3D printed, brightly colored superhero plastic hands that are much less durable and much less functional than what they're in the profession of providing. And they say, that looks like a toy.
Right.
And the kids look at it
and
they say, that looks like a toy.
I love it. I want it,
That's right.
Interestingly enough, to go back to the market question, which you just addressed, is you've got this group that is maybe putting up some barriers, even though if they understood it's a completely different market, not just because of the style of the prosthetic that you're creating, but also the market that they're going after is people who have insurance, or if it's covered, or people who can pay out of pocket. And that is not your target population.
That's
And
right.
I would wish that those folks would get on board with you and join you in sort of, because I'm sure they have folks who come to them that they actually can't serve.
Well, that's true. It's quite true. And numerous prosthetists remark on that. But of course, this is their bread and butter. They are overworked and underpaid and constantly being squeezed by the insurance companies and by the regulations.
Yeah.
They don't have a great deal of time for pro bono work. They're not volunteer humanitarians. This is not their particular problem. Now, many of them actually are also volunteer humanitarians, and we've worked with some of them. We now have a program where we have a newsletter. Anyone who wants to subscribe to the newsletter, they should check us out. In any case, go to e-NABLE.org. That's E with a hyphen. You can read some of these articles and you can subscribe to the newsletter. The next issue of the newsletter will include a chapter spotlight, which is a new recurring feature in the newsletter. Not so new anymore, a year or so old. And we'll be talking about the Pakistan chapter. In Pakistan, they are not interested in superhero hands. They're not even interested in functionality if it's at the cost of cosmesis. They want a hand that no one will notice.
Right, that looks like a hand. Mm-hmm.
So it's a whole different dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, most of their clients are not children, but adults who've lost a hand in an accident with a thresher, which is a common injury.
Yeah.
So the situation in India and Pakistan is similar. But I had an intern in my lab here in Rochester a few years ago, which he said, this is most of what we do. He was saying we need to make more hands for people who are losing them in threshers. All of the threshers say, don't stick your hand in the thresher. I said, you don't need more hands. You need someone to get to the thresher company
Right.
and say, put a safety device on there.
Right. It's a good point. It's true.
Anyway, the point is, we live in a very rich and diverse ecosystem around the world in which there are, at any particular point, a particular convergence of legal and economic and corporate and humanitarian and cultural factors,
Right.
all of which converge in a unique way in each circumstance. And we've learned over the years that it is not one size fit all for hands, and it's not one size fits all for e-NABLE,
Right.
which is the rationale in some ways for the local chapter scheme.
Well, they know what their needs are best and how they can build those relationships in order to either get referrals
That's right.
or to meet the exact need that's being requested.
In principle, and sometimes even in fact.
I was even thinking about the community here that you spoke about before, which is not so much that they would volunteer themselves, but would make that referral path a little bit more direct. Because if they're seeing folks that they aren't going to benefit from because they're
Yes.
in the commercial side of it, so to speak, could they then at least be in the bucket of, I'm going to, refer you to e-NABLE?
And it's been what for us seems like a long time, 6 or 7 years. The devices we have now, and this is something we haven't talked about, but the designs of these devices are another important product of the e-NABLE community. At this point, we have a number of devices which I think are approaching the utility and the functionality of some of the medical devices that the professional community is producing. Non-toys are now becoming available, and while they're more difficult for our volunteers to make, they are probably easier for some prosthetists to take on. And so we have to keep revisiting these things because these circumstances change and our own capabilities change.
Would you share with us, and you probably have multiple ones, but a particularly favorite examples story. You've shared the one about the young kid and the playground and the origins of the carpenter, but I wonder if there's any others that just sort of stick in the front of your mind that you'd like to share, just because it's such a, I think what you've done and you've spearheaded covers so many areas. It's open source, which is a beautiful thing in and of itself. It's community building. It's truly humanitarian. It's volunteering at its best.
Well, sure. Two things come to mind. One has to do with this social function of the devices, and the other has to do with the fact that at this point, we have uh, several people, volunteers in the community, who are themselves amputees who are designing and building this next generation of interesting devices. They found us because they were interested in prosthetics for obvious reasons, and they have a good sense of what's needed, and they've turned out to be among our most talented designers. And of course, they are now getting to use all sorts of skills. And the fact that they have unique personal insight into the needs of amputees is now a virtue,
Yes.
rather than merely a handicap. So I have several designers in mind who are missing hands or arms, who are really doing terrific work. There's one named Nate in Colorado, and there's another one named Patrick, who's doing a university student doing an internship with me. There's a group in England heavily involved, and they just got a medal and a meeting with the Queen for their work giving devices to children all over England.
I love it.
And it's a really nice case and a nice example of what we do. I myself am more of the cat herder architect of the environment than I am a maker myself. I've been instrumental in a couple of e-NABLE's important designs. The gripper hand with Skip Metz here in Rochester, which has only two moving parts and may be more functional than the much more complicated devices. And the RIT arm, which was one of the very first elbow actuated devices where bending and unbending your arm opens and closes the hand. In some ways, those both seemed like simple shortcuts and a little bit embarrassing to share with the community, but in both cases, they have turned out to be very helpful design principles that other people are expanding on. The moral of that story, if I may digress, is that unlike the professional engineer who does not want to release any design until it's up to their high professional standards, the responsibility and the opportunity of the humanitarian maker is to put something out well before it's up to their high professional standards, but approximately at the moment when it is substantially better than nothing, if it will benefit those whose only alternative right now is nothing. So I don't have a lot of personal experience, maybe half a dozen cases, of giving a device to a recipient. But I went on a trip to Honduras a couple of springs ago, where we have a very effective chapter. And I met two recipients of full e-NABLE arms. We're known for hands, but we have a couple of very good arm designs, and these guys had them. And both of them had lost them in electrical accidents. Both of them became unemployable. After getting their arms, both of them were able to be self-employed. One of them has a sandal shop in the Mercadero. And when I visited him, he demonstrated proudly how he could pick these things up off the wall using his arm and how he could fit people with the shop. And I asked him, so how often do you wear your arm? Because as I mentioned, most prosthetics aren't worn all the time. He said, I wear it every day. That was pretty interesting. And I said, and what's the most useful thing you use it for? Expecting him to talk about some operation in the shop. He says, well, when I go out for drinks with my buddies, it's really nice to have the arm and I can do fist bumps. The electricity he was playing with, I should say, was from welding, and that's how he lost his arm. But because he was a welder, he had replaced over time most of the components of his 3D printed plastic arm with welded sheet metal components. So he'd really made it his, and he'd made it representative of him. And those are all great. Later that day, I met the other guy. Now, the other guy was working from home with his wife and his cute as a button 3-year-old daughter, selling houseplants from home. I asked him the same questions. He also looked at me curiously. I put it on in the morning and I take it out off at night. And he's standing there holding his little girl's hand. I say, so what's the most valuable thing you use your arm for? And he gave me this look and he pointed to the little girl and says, this,
Yeah.
I can hold
Yeah.
my little girl's hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the social function of these things,
Mhm.
which is quite distinct from all of the emphases that the prosthetists and the prosthetic technicians and everyone else focuses on, turns out to be the most meaningful part of the enterprise.
How one expresses themselves is often with motions of hand,
Oh, absolutely.
right? And so the social examples that you gave are really uses that have as you point out, the deepest meaning.
We've done an amazing thing for some of the people in need who we have reached, and I wish we could reach more.
Hmm.
We have done, if I may say so, an equally amazing thing for thousands of volunteers.
Yes.
I found this to be some of the most interesting and rewarding activities of their careers. That includes, by the way, I've literally had a 14-year-old say, this is the most rewarding thing I've done in my entire life, said the
Yeah.
14-year-old. But
Yes.
I've got 70-year-olds who will say the same thing. This is not, I like to point out, an altruistic venture. It
Right.
only works if it's really rewarding for the volunteers. And for
Mhm.
the right volunteers, it's great. You get to play with technology. People admire you for what you do. The kids thank you, melt your heart. It's
Mhm.
a very rewarding activity
Mhm.
for the people we have managed to attract, and we keep on seeking to recruit. Some of your listeners may
Yes.
wish to join us.
I hope so. I want to emphasize that even a bit more. I think anytime you volunteer, there is a reciprocity in there to
That's
keep
right.
it going.
Small and Gutsy is sponsored by the Intrinsic Group, my boutique management consulting firm specializing in guiding organizations to leverage talent, optimize processes, and to ensure the organization's narrative is aligned with their culture. We'd love to invite you to be a sponsor. So if you're interested in sponsoring Small and Gutsy to keep it going, please reach out to me at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com.
So, as you may or may not know, toward the end of our interview, we always have a round of quick and gutsy. Hopefully, you'll find them fun questions. So, if you're ready, I'm ready.
You're ready, I'm ready.
Okay, great. What is at the top of your wish list? The answer can't be money or funding.
I would love to have professionals helping us with the follow-up and evaluation so that we can improve what we're doing. You say it's only been 6 years, but I say it's 6 years and we still don't have good data. How many recipients, how many devices, how many are still in use, how often are they used, under what conditions are they used, what's failing, what could we make better? I can explain why we're in this situation, but it bothers me. So that's what's at the top of my list. It turns out that's an example of something that it's very hard to get volunteers to do.
I think that's a research project with a university going after foundation money.
Could be.
Yeah, I think that you're on to, I agree with you. I think that is a great next step, and I wish that for you also.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think it's really important. If you were to think of a song that describes e-NABLE, what would it be?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I have a song rattling around in my head. I don't know why it's relevant, but I will share it with you.
Please.
Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
I think it's incredibly relevant. Look what you're building, what you've built and where it goes to. I think it's a great song. What makes e-NABLE gutsy?
You know, what makes it gutsy, I think, is that we are open in every sense of the word. Open source, open membership, transparent as we know how to be, and therefore willing, and we don't know how to avoid it, to have all of our imperfections and all of our unmet aspirations on display. I've talked about devices that are, you know, embarrassingly inferior to brand X, the medical grade profession. We couldn't do what we did if we held ourselves to that standard. And yet, being willing to put out devices which are obviously substandard, means that we can make some people very happy who would otherwise be quite unhappy.
What is something that outsiders or maybe even some insiders don't know about e-NABLE?
You stumped me there. Not to say that it doesn't exist,
Right.
but
But you're
either
very
I'm repressing some deep secret that I've been keeping locked down for a long time, or I'm being terribly insincere in telling you that I don't know the answer. I think there ought to be some things that people don't know, but they don't come to mind.
Here's I'm gonna kind of put one out there, see if it fits. Because you are global, you have this big network, it can look to an outsider like you are a much bigger organization
That's for sure.
versus a network than you are.
That's right. And a network, we say 187 chapters. Some of those chapters consist of one founder, one ex-founder.
Fair
Some
enough.
of them consist of hundreds of
Mm,
very active volunteers serving thousands of people.
right,
So
right.
you're quite right. But in many cases, many of those so-called volunteers are people who have indicated they would like to be a part of something that they recognize as inspiring. They're
Mhm.
not people who are actually active in it on a regular basis. On the other hand, I think our influence is actually much larger
I agree.
than the collection of people ourselves. So we're both bigger and smaller than people think. That's my big secret.
Which I think makes you small and gutsy.
There you go.
My last question for you before we close out is if you could get one celebrity or influencer to endorse or talk about e-NABLE, who might it be?
Well, most people who know e-NABLE will immediately say Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
because he actually did
Mhm.
an appearance with a kid who got a bionic hand from a chapter that spun off from e-NABLE.
Mhm.
So at that point, they weren't a part of e-NABLE.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a great and charming video.
Yeah.
Uh, and yet it had more influence on that spin-off than it did on the community overall. So that's the one who comes to mind and
Mhm.
might still be great.
Mhm.
I would be willing to accept a phone call from Robert Downey Jr. since you've asked.
I love it. I'm gonna tweet him and hashtag him when we put our stuff out.
There you go.
Okay, for sure. What is I know you mentioned how people should reach you, but do you just want to reiterate how folks should access your website if they want to
Sure.
either volunteer, if they know someone who needs it? Let's just close
Right.
with that
So the
piece.
go-to address is e-nable.org.
Great.
If you want to interact with our volunteers, you go to hub.enable.org. If you want to see a map of chapters around the world, you go to map.enable.org. That's e-nable.org. And if you want to continue the conversation with me, you email jschull, JSCHULL, at e-nable.org.
John, this was such a pleasure to talk with you and learn about this e-NABLE, how you started it, how it has grown, where it's gotten to, and even the organic nature of the discussions you're in and where it may go to.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. These conversations always bring out things that you say I should have thought about before, and I'll think about it some more. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you or your listeners.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, give us some stars and write a review on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts, or buy us a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/small-and-gutsy. Here's one from Scott. I'm in the car a lot and have the opportunity to choose a podcast to listen to, and I choose Small and Gutsy. These organizations are tremendous in what they do, and the host has a way of bringing their information to life with her questions and follow-up remarks. Keep them coming. Thanks, Scott. Our plan is to keep doing them, so keep listening. Thanks a lot. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, my co-producer, sound engineer, and composer, the amazing Pavel Franson, my exceptionally talented graphic designer, Nate Addy, my social work intern extraordinaire, Stephanie Tran. Please check out their bios on the Intrinsic website, and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. From small and gutsy to big with impact, I'm Laura Witkoff, and thanks for listening.